Well, hello everybody and good afternoon and welcome to Recovery Live. This event is brought to you by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's Bringing Recovery Supports to Scale Technical Assistance Center Strategy, otherwise known as Brass Tacks. Our TA Center is dedicated to increasing access to recovery supports, and we achieve this work through a variety of mechanisms, including a lot of technical assistance focused on systems transformation and developing the capacity of peer-run recovery community and family and youth-led organizations. Today, we are extraordinarily fortunate to have two really amazing presenters with us today. We're going to be talking about peer supports for young adults living with serious mental illness or substance use disorders. I am just really pleased to introduce today's presenters, both of whom I've worked with in the past, both of whom are just outstanding in the work that they do every day. Johanna Bergen, who is the Executive Director with Youth Move National, and Bertrand Brown, who is a peer recovery coach with the Georgia Council on Substance Abuse. And again, I'm thrilled that they've been able to join us today, and we're about to get into this discussion. But first, I've got a few housekeeping items to go over with everybody. So Recovery Live events are really different from usual webinars. We want you to engage directly with the presenters and each other through the live chat box. You'll be answering several audience poll questions as well. And then the presenters are going to share some of their initial thoughts. We'll share some of their initial thoughts, sorry for the technology issue, and then we will answer questions that you raised during this event. So you're going to see a lot of movement in the room, and we hope you will find this energizing and exciting. You can share your questions and comments throughout this event. Audience members are in a listen-only mode and can submit questions by typing them into the comments and questions here box. If you happen to experience some technical difficulties, please request assistance in that same box. Tech support staff are currently standing by, they're viewing the comments, and they will respond really quickly to your needs. We've also got several resources to this topic available to download from our resources box. And to download a file, you just highlight the name of the document. The download button is going to light up in the box. Click that button, and that document will automatically be sent to your computer. Now, as people were arriving today, we posted a poll question for everybody in the room to answer. So let me take a minute and just take a look at what those responses are. So what we're looking here is basically demographics on this poll, and we're asking what roles apply to you. So it looks like we've got about 16, maybe 70% of youth, young adults. 22 people identify as people in recovery. We've got about 31% or so of folks who identify as peer support workers. We have a smattering of supervisors of peer staff. It's fantastic. About 20% program administrators, and that's always really great to have the program administrators here. We've actually got one ED or CEO. I'm thrilled to see that. It's exciting to see the level and number of clinicians that are on the call. It's about 30%, but people who are identifying as clinicians. We've got a smattering of policymakers. We've got one TA provider, great. We've got about 10%, well, about 9% of students. We've got about 7% of educators. This is fantastic. And then we've got another about 7.5%, 8% that identify as researchers. And then we've got some folks who are just kind of here as others, and we hope that all of you really enjoy what we're presenting today. And again, there's going to be some additional polls coming your way. So the style of today's event is really dependent on this type of participation from you. And as I said, there'll be more polls coming up. It's really important that you participate, and we appreciate that. Today's session is being recorded. It's going to last approximately 1 hour. So if, as you're listening to this content, you feel your organization may need or would like some technical assistance around this or any other topic, you can access TA from Brass Tacks really quickly. You can email us at Brass Tacks. You can use the registration link to make that happen, or you can simply go right to the SAMHSA Brass Tacks website and click on the big giant blue button that says Request Technical Assistance here. Now, the last thing before we get into the good stuff, when we close this room today, a satisfaction survey is going to automatically open in your internet browser. We really appreciate you taking a few minutes to complete the survey. It's the surveys that you guys have responded to in the past have created the event in front of you today at Recovery Live. This was built on the feedback that we received from people who participated. So we listen, and your input it's just critical for us to identify what's going to work best for all of you. All right, so that's enough for me. You're all here to listen to Johanna and Bertrand. So let's get them busy with all of you. Johanna and Bertrand, please get us underway, and thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm so excited to be working with Bertrand on this project. He's got great expertise to share. I'm going to start us off just really quickly about why are we here today and what is youth peer support and this very unique support and service that is available to young adults across our nation. So when we talk about peer support, a lot of you are coming today with very in-depth expertise in peer support. We're talking about a mutual relationship and connection between two people who share an experience, and their relationship is built off of that shared experience. Today we're going to be talking about the specific work of youth peer providers and youth recovery coaches and the nuance about the relationship they hold with their peers, and I'm so glad you're here to join us. So the thing that's unique about youth peer support is that we're talking about a young adult who's serving in a role as a peer supporting another young adult. And the thing that makes this unique is that oftentimes youth peer providers are navigating and supporting the navigation of more systems and a certain type of lived experience. Many peers that we work with across the country in these roles are helping youth navigate the child serving systems, including education in primary and secondary education, the children's behavioral health system, and they're also serving as supports and navigators for adult systems. And this means that it's incredibly valuable for young people to be in these roles. The relationship-based experiences comes from their own experiences navigating these same pathways. The reason that Youth Move is so committed to supporting youth peer support across the country is it's what our membership is asking for. Youth and young adults are asking for support in navigating their systems, reaching their life goals from people that are like them, who get their culture, who get their generation, and have walked in their shoes. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about with you all today. There are so many of us on today's call that are in the helping profession, right? I just smile when I say helping profession. I found it really helpful to contextualize where youth peer support fits on the continuum of helping relationships. So there's sort of a complex graphic in front of you. I'm going to break it down for you here quickly. On the left-hand side of the screen, we see what I would call traditional helping relationships. These are oftentimes a clinician, a therapist, a provider in a relationship with someone who may be called a client. These relationships are one-directional. Someone who has a degree, a certain type of knowledge is passing on their knowledge and their recommendations based on what they know. And these providers are in a helping relationship. They're in a helping relationship that also has a power imbalance. So the provider or the clinician holds a certain amount of power from their degree and the position they hold in that relationship. If we look at the far right end of this continuum, we see another type of helping relationship. We see friendship. And in friendship, there are two people who are interested in helping and supporting each other where there is not a power imbalance. There is true mutuality. Both come to the table on their own volition to be in this relationship. And that is a helping relationship. And so the question for all of you is if you are currently offering youth peer support or you're planning to implement youth peer support in the future, is to be very intentional about where in between the left and right of this continuum you are building youth peer support. We see across the country many youth peer programs being sort of on the left-hand side of this continuum. They're formalized, peers have a client load, they serve a certain type of youth. Youth have to be eligible to access the youth peer support. There's a formalization of this. Sort of on the right-hand side of the continuum, we see some really amazing work in youth-led and youth-run organizations who offer a more informal community-based peer support. There's less of a power imbalance here, and there's a voluntary nature in how young adults access these services. I believe that peer support should be available across this entire continuum, and lived experience throughout these relationships is powerful to helping young adults be more approachable, more interested in accessing the services and supports we offer. But if you are coming to today's Recovery Live thinking about the funding aspect of this and how to finance peer support, you need to be pretty clear about what you're building along this continuum. Before I pass over to you, Bertrand, just a quick second about how much youth peers do. Young adults in these roles oftentimes provide one-on-one peer support in a very intensive manner. Many young adults serving in these roles are supporting and offering group coaching and group peer sessions. Many young adults are serving in outreach and engagement roles, and every one of us that serve in a role that requires us to live and use our lived experience every day are also advocates for ourselves, our roles, and the work we have to do in the community. And we see young adults doing all of these things. Bertrand, can I pass over to you to talk a little bit more from your perspective?
Sure. So what makes youth peer support unique? It's a couple things. It gives hope. Youth and young adult peer support gives hope by showing what is possible. Like, I'm living proof of what can happen. It demonstrates recovery is age independent. You don't have to wait until you're 30 or 40. You can get it. I got into recovery when I was 17 years old. It honors the voice of young people as valid at an early age and early stage. It sets recovery as the expectation and shows that young people can establish integrity and self-worth. Recovery also helps provide hope to others when it can look like no one understands in a tough time. And, I've had personal experience with that. And if you think about any social movement, whether it's civil rights, protests, women's rights, HIV and AIDS, young people always had a voice in meaningful ways. Youth and young adult peer support is not the norm, but we are in a recovery field where, we're changing social norms. So changing social norms for young people will have a lasting effect. And then, when we think about youth and young adult recovery supports on a preventative side, that's all about, research shows that when young people perceive something to be harmful, they will change their attitude and their behavior. So if a peer can explain how alcohol and drug use affect their lives in a negative way, this can have a strong preventative impact. So I use my experience a lot when I'm, working on a warm line of speaking to young people, because that matters in my experience, and what happened matters so I can give on to that young person and let them know this is my life, this is what happened to me, and it doesn't have to be the same for you. All peer support is mutually beneficial in that both peer get something both peers get something from the helping exchange. With young people, this is especially true as peer pressure can be a real strong force, both positive and negative. And I've had experience where I hang around a lot of young people, and some of them are in recovery, and some of them are not. And with the ones that are in recovery, it is it's positive peer pressure, so they can know that you don't have to be looked down on because of you're not smoking weed or drinking or whatever the case may be. So we can be the positive peer pressure. And sometimes young people can be looking for an excuse not to use, and a youth peer supporter can offer that way out. And like I just said, I can, I'm there at different parties, and I'm there, but I'm in recovery. And that's the difference between a lot of us. And yeah, let's move to the next one. So I want to tell y'all a little bit about me and my experience. First and foremost, my name is Bertrand Brown, and I'm a person in long-term recovery, which means I haven't found the need to use any mind-altering substance in the past 4 years, 2 months, and 10 days. And from that, I'm able to be here as a supporter and give hope to others. I started smoking when I was about 9 years old, and from there it became my lifestyle. School was not a priority for me, and eventually, by the time I was in 9th grade, second semester, I was in alternative school. Shortly after that, I was locked up at 15 years old for 2.5 years. While I was behind bars, I knew something needed to change about my life. Are you serious?
Go ahead, Bertie.
So sorry.
Bertrand, we can hear you despite the other technical difficulties.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. So while I was behind bars, I knew something needed to change about my life, but I didn't know what. So I was exposed to the residential substance abuse treatment program, and a little bit before that, I got a mentor that believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself, and that meant a whole lot to me. She's actually on a webinar, so hey, Miss Aspinwall. And then after, while I was in a residential substance abuse treatment program, I met people in recovery, and actually 2 motivational speakers came to my graduation, the RSAT graduation. Neil Campbell, who's actually my executive director, I'm sorry about that, and Sissy Weldon. She used to work for us. She moved to Cali. I was the MC of the graduation, and they actually asked me what I was doing when I got out, and I didn't know. I didn't know whether I got out in 2 months or 2 years. So I told Neil that, and she said, how would you like to work for me? And she gave me her business card. And I thought it was a joke, honestly. But I got out on a Wednesday, and I called the Georgia Council on Substance Abuse on Thursday, and they told me come up here on Monday. On Monday, I came up here, and I was actually already hired at an RCO, and that was so amazing to me. And a couple months later, I became a certified addiction recovery empowerment specialist in the state of Georgia, and also a certified peer specialist for addictive diseases. And the quality of my life have never been this great before. So I want to share a piece of me with all of you guys. I just became a dad. Thank you. So Mason is my first son. You have Mason and Grayson in the middle, and Mason all around. That is what my life revolves around. And if I wasn't in recovery today, I don't know what my life would be looking like today. Grayson back there is actually Miss Aspinwall's dog. And they love him so much. I had to actually recreate my family, because it's not always about the family you were born into. It's about, the family you create for yourself sometimes. And, here at the Georgia Council, we have that.
Bertrand, I love working with you each and every time. Thank you so much for sharing and really modeling youth peer support to us on the phone call today. I'm so happy, and congratulations, Mason. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
I'll add, Bertrand, to another level of your story, and that's the work that you've been able to do with us nationally and really helping be a technical assistance response to communities who are trying to figure this out. How do we have young people who are actively living their resiliency and recovery journey be able to model what recovery looks like to others in their community? So thank you.
Thank you guys for giving me this opportunity and asking me what I need in the process. So thank you guys.
Awesome. Okay, so Bertrand, we're going to have questions for you, I bet, in just a minute. I'm going to run us through just a little bit more content for those of you that are thinking about planning or implementing for youth peer support, so your community can have the relationship and the leaders, just like Bertrand shared with you, as it exists in Georgia today. These slides also have a ton of content. Please take them as a resource, use them, or use them to craft your technical assistance question that you want to enter to brass tacks later. So for those of you, as I go into this section, we can pull another poll up to find out where all of you are in the process. You can take a look at that poll question in a second. There are so many considerations when your community or state or tribal community is working to start implementing youth peer support, and I'm going to run you through just the highlight reel. So the first thing that it's important to look at is, where does youth peer support fit? Where are the young adults that the peer support will be available to or offered to? And we can look to the parent peer movement and to the adult consumer peer movement for lessons in this. I think, as I said earlier, young people are navigating a different type of system transition than we are once we're sort of fully in adulthood. And we want to make sure that we put youth peer support where young adults are actually accessing services. So you may need to think in your community, if that's in the children's system, what does the bridge look like? What does eligibility to this service look like in the adult system? We want to build something that is actually going to be available to all of the young adults who need and want to access this service. I think there's an important role for clarity, for defining what you are building when you're building out youth peer support. So much of the youth peer support we see has grown on the foundation of the youth advocacy movement, and that's so great. My personal experience is that serving as a youth advocate and serving as a youth peer are really different roles. And some of us love one more than the other. So our movement has created an amazing amount of options for youth to identify how to enter into the movement and into their work. Youth peer support is one track. Let's make sure that we define that role to be true to peer support. We've talked about where does peer support on the continuum fall. We've talked about how to access it. You want to be able to answer all of these questions as you move from a planning phase into an implementation phase. As I look at the results of the poll, we've got folks that are a little bit all over the place, which I love. Maybe we can keep this up to see as others of you answer, but many of you are already offering youth peer support. Awesome, way to go. I want to live in your communities. And then there are about 10% of us planning and others still exploring. This is awesome. Okay, So other key considerations I would encourage you to think about is, what does the training process look like for youth peer support? So many states have robust training, curriculums written, certification processes in place if you want to serve as a peer in the adult system, right? Not so much in the youth and young adult space, right? So communities across the country, and we've been working with many of them, are doing multiple things. Some choose to send young adults to an already established adult peer curriculum. I call that the traditional model. Many are finding that that's not enough. Those of us in peer roles want to know more. We need to know more about different jargon and different navigation, especially bridging the child to the adult world. And so there are communities offering an enhancement. You take the traditional route, the certification and training that already exists, and then you get a booster shot, continuing education per se, that teaches you those skills that you really need that are relevant to the youth system. I'm really intrigued about those communities that are tailoring, essentially taking a curriculum that exists for another peer role, like a parent or adult peer, and modifying, adapting, and changing that curriculum to tailor it to the role that young adults will be playing in these youth peer roles. And then it looks like the font maybe is in white, so it's a mystery. But a youth-informed or a youth-driven training is something that's really created from the ground up, starts from scratch, and youth and young adults are a part of building what we need to know in a peer provider role to support the young people in our work. So you're going to have to choose how you're going to approach, especially if youth peer support does not exist in your community in any way. And then organizational development matters a lot to me. When we think about long-term program success for building youth peer support, we need to think about sustainability from day one. Your first planning conversation should be talking about how are we going to finance this in the long haul. There's such an opportunity to use grant dollars or local foundation dollars as innovation funds to work through the complex questions of who trains, what's your curriculum, where do we find our workforce, how do we support our workforce. But at the end of the day, those grants aren't going to be your long-term financing strategy. Medicaid dollars are an option, and we're seeing more and more states build in a specific definition for youth recovery and youth peer support so that Medicaid funding can be used to support these roles. It's not going to pay for everything. If we think about all the things youth peers do that Bertrand and I have talked about, the oftentimes the outreach work, the intensive engagement process to encourage young adults who are system weary and wary to enter into a relationship with us, the advocacy time we do, that's not going to be financed by the Medicaid stream. So we need to think about day one on how do we finance and how do we braid multiple diverse funding sources to do that. And then how are we going to support youth peers so they are successful for the long run in our job? And Bertrand, you're my go-to guy for answering that question. So over to you.
Thank you. So, by the way, I know I left this off, but I'm actually 21, and I've been working in the field for about 3 years now. So I started when I was 18. So, and I say that to say the first bullet point. When I got here, I didn't know what recovery was and what it meant. Honestly, when I heard about recovery, it was credit recovery in high school. So, you know, I didn't know what recovery was when I was first exposed to this field. So having people that achieve recovery in different ways help a young person figure out their path. And one of the quotes that I want to share with you guys today is, we all walk the same walk, but, you know, we just wore different shoes. You know, we got to the same place. We just wore different shoes. So having someone in recovery to speak with helps. Family members may not always know about recovery, or it's just not their reality. And for me, you know, my family was opposed to my recovery. They loved the old me and not the new me, but I knew I wanted more from my life. So having a strong support system to listen to confidentially is very important. There's been many times where I spoke to my executive director at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning because I was having a hard time that my family couldn't understand. And Tom, I just want to say this one thing. I was very insecure about my time when I first started. I actually did one event with the deputy director of SAMHSA, brass tacks, Stephen, where I introduced myself. My name is Bertrand Brown, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. But when I was with him, I was in front of people with 20 years, 50 years, and stuff like that, and it was just, oh, well, my name is Bertrand Brown, and I'm a person with short-term recovery trying to get to long-term. So I was very insecure. But today, I want to encourage people, even with 2 days, it matters. Your recovery matters to someone, and, you're not alone because we was all at that 2-day mark. And then learning effective ways to communicate about my recovery without judgment, and knowing words and concepts that are not deficit-based or not negative. So the language of recovery is important. And, when I say deficit-based, I want to give y'all some examples. If I got on today's webinar and said, hello, my name is Bertrand Brown, and I'm an addict, that would have had a negative connotation on it. But I got on here and I said, hello, my name is Bertrand Brown, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And you guys are still listening to me. So, having the different, deficit-based and negative and positive. So language does matter. And one more thing I want to share with you guys is, I like to say the elevator gets off at every floor. I've heard a lot where people have said, you got to hit rock bottom, and I just feel like that isn't true. In a world that we live in and what's happening in today's world, the elevator gets off at every floor. You don't have to go to jail. You don't have to get in treatment. You don't have to die to get help. We are here. And I just want to promote the new language of recovery. And I want to add something before I move to the next slide. Well, no, I'll add it at the next slide. I'm sorry. So, becoming a peer supporter for young adults. So the main decision that goes into a youth or a young adult decision to become a trained recovery coach is similar to that of older peers. Some of mine was the desire to assist and relate. Our stories does matter, and if we all reach one, teach one, and then we'll keep one. So they can go ahead and reach the next one. So the hope of helping someone in a way that only a person who has gone through a similar situation can. I'm an advocate for all peer supports, but young adult peer supports, it really stands out because, I didn't go through this, 5 years ago. I went through this 4 years ago, 3 years ago. Some of the same things that young people are still facing, I'm facing as well. So you're not alone there. Another aspect can be that seizing the opportunity to give young people a chance at closing the generation gap that at times create misunderstandings. I'm gonna use Stephen as an example. If he was one of my counselors, I would have a harder time trying to relate because Stephen, you went through this probably 10 or 20 years ago, and I'm currently going through this. So it's closing that generation gap and closing those misunderstandings. Other considerations is preserving our own recovery through helping others. That is what makes my wheels turn, helping others. And goals we have as an adult, or even as simple as and as basic as just job and salary concerns. If I have to worry about what I'm going to eat tonight, I'm not worried about how effectively I do my job, or if I got to worry about, where my family is going to sleep tonight. I'm not worried about what's going on with the peers that are in front of me. So, I just wanted to share that with you guys. And also, I got to the place I am today because, when I got to this recovery community organization, they asked me what did I need and how could they help me. I actually walked through the door. I didn't have an ID, a birth certificate, social security card, anything. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, where all of my things were destroyed during the storm, and I was never able to get those back. But, Georgia Council went out of their way to help me get an ID and get a social security card. It was so crazy because you can't get a social without an ID, you can't get an ID without a social, and it just was crazy. But they worked with me for about 6 weeks to help me get to where I am today. And I just wanted, so, when we're thinking about supporting youth and young adults in this workforce, know their concerns may be different from mine, and, they are unique because I probably would have still been working on getting a birth certificate and stuff like that if it wasn't for the team here at the Georgia Council who wrapped their hands around me and, supported me in different ways. And like I said, this is probably not good practice, but my executive director have given me the opportunity to call her phone at different times of the day and night, and she was always there. So knowing that it was always someone there for me that I could reach back to, that was very important. And Joanna, I want to pass it back to you and talk about, some of the different resources that we use to put this thing together.
You know what, Bertrand? I think we get to answer questions before they hear from me again. Are you game for that?
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
What we got?
Okay, Stephen, what should we do?
All right, guys. So before we get into the questions, let me have Melissa pull up our third and final poll. And then what I'm going to do is give everybody just a second around responding to this, so folks can take a quick look. And once we get through this, then I'm going to jump into the questions, and we're going to close the Q&A portion for everyone at about 5 minutes to the top of the hour. Johanna will then come back on and give a little bit of a review of the resources that are here. And then I don't want everybody running off until we can actually close, because I've got a little piece of important information to share with everybody right before we close. As I'm watching the poll responses coming in, the question is, if your organization provides youth peer services, how do you support the youth peer workers on the staff? And it looks like about 63% use coaching and mentoring. About 31% have supervision from a peer. That's fantastic. Another 30% use co-reflection with other youth peer workers, and these are not mutually exclusive. These all could be done, all together. And then we've got 51% continuing education opportunities, and just I guess as a a bit of encouragement. Anytime we can access education and training opportunities, particularly as people with lived experience and peer support workers, that's a fantastic opportunity. Let's grab them. Recommend self-care. It's 55%, and I'll just say a quick word about that. Self-care often gets short shrift, but it is essential if we want to stay in this long term. If we want to play this game for a long time, it's really critical to have a work-life balance and pay attention to self-care. And then we've got another 10% of other, and I suspect that they'll specify below, but I can't see that. And with that, I'm going to close this poll, and I'm going to jump into the Q&A. So Johanna and Bertrand, here come the very first questions. I'm going to just throw them out to both of you, and you both have the opportunity to respond. So how do we know when young adults are ready to be peer support workers or participate as peers?
You want to take the
Sure.
lead, or you want
I'll
me?
go first, then I'll pass to you. So a couple of things come to mind, Stephen. This is a super common question. So first, we're ready. Our young people are ready. And so just to own it, you need to believe us when we say that. I think a couple of things. I absolutely love when communities invest in young adults before they're making the decision to hire youth peers. This can look a lot of ways. One example is to offer a youth leadership academy that teaches some pretty standard self-advocacy, community advocacy, leadership capacity. And then out of a training opportunity like that, outline the options there really are to join a helping workforce. Give something to the youth in your community and give those opportunities to a lot of young adults. And the outcome of that is an option to choose to step into youth peer roles. So we need to invest before youth show up at the door saying, I may be interested in a job. The other thing that comes to mind is that it's oftentimes the readiness of our organizations to support young adults to be successful. So Bertrand, you have been talking about this this cultural nature of young people. We have a culture as millennials and as Generation Next, and our organizations that we work in have to be ready to support that part of our culture, as well as our culture of resiliency and recovery. And so sometimes I find when we're working with programs that it's actually the organizations that need to increase their readiness to be able to support young people. And then young adults are going to come into this role, use those supports, and be ready to do the work.
Definitely. I love everything you said. And, one of the first questions that I was asked coming into this field was, what are you passionate about? And having young people think outside of the box. It was, I looked at Neil like, what are you talking about? Because, that was something someone never asked me before. So asking the questions that matter, like, what are you passionate about? What are your next goals? And, trying to think about where this young person will be headed after this organization. But, coming into the organization, it is kind of like, when adults are coming into the organization. It's like, what are you good at? What can you do, and how can that fit into the role of this organization? So today, I don't know what my answer was 3 years ago, but today my answer is, I want to let young people know that it's different solutions to the problems that we face on a daily basis. And, from there, I started speaking at different middle schools and high schools. I started working with brass tacks, providing technical assistance in high schools. Sometimes I have to ask, like, where were you guys when I was in high schools? Because, I was reaching out for help, but I didn't know who to come to. But now we have people coming into the schools to find out what's needed from the students to be successful. So that is always good. And like I said, Johanna, you hit that right on the nose.
So, Johanna and Bertrand, thank you. It's always really empowering listening to both of you. And I think this next question is going to segue or dovetail really well with what you just said, Bertrand. Can you give some advice about how to add young adult peer support to clinical or service teams, and crafting the role to firm up what the youth peer does separate from other service team members?
So that's a little difficult, but I'm gonna give you my my answer. So it's difficult to answer that. Can you give me that one more time, Stephen? I'm sorry.
I can. Let me pull it back up in front of me. We need some advice about how to add young adult peer supports to clinical and service teams, and how. It's really in two parts, Bertrand. Advice on how to add young adult peer supports to the clinical and service team, and then in with that, how do you craft a role to really support and firm up what the youth peer is doing as opposed to what other people on that team are doing?
Okay. So first and foremost, I can say that will be very difficult for me coming into an organization like as a peer and working in a clinical setting. That will be very difficult for me because I get to use my experience as a peer, and as clinicians, I don't think we have the opportunity to use our lived experience. And also crafting a role to what, Stephen?
So what you're trying to do is create basically, Bertrand, you're creating a spot on the team for the youth peer support worker, and I think what the question is driving at is what makes them different than, say, if I was I'm the peer support worker. What makes that different? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So what makes it different is like I said earlier, closing that generation gap, and the misunderstandings about what works for Stephen and what works for me, because it's different solutions to the problems that we face. And as peers, as young people in recovery, we have to let other young people know that you just don't have to go down a 12-step route. You just don't have to go down an all recovery route. It's different routes it's different walks to the same destination. Did I answer that, or?
You got it, Bertrand. And I'll go to Johanna, Johanna. I'm so sorry, and we'll see if she can just add a little bit more to it from her perspective.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm with Bertrand. It's difficult. And I think that the thing that we miss is that we put the emphasis on the person in the peer role who's entering the teaming environment, often a very clinical environment. And what needs to happen is sort of a more systemic look. So we need to say, what is actually the role, what is the purpose of that whole team? What is the purpose of the youth peer? And then we need to train all of the members participating in the team about what youth peer support is. And the thing that is most difficult is that peers need to hold that safety in the relationship with them and the young adults, and they need to be removing the power in that relationship. And that means they don't respond in moments of crisis. They don't respond in discussions around sort of adherence to treatment plans in the same way that a clinician or a case manager does. And everyone has to understand how that role is different. And I think a lot of times, we expect the youth peer to be the advocate continually within the team about why their role is different. And really, as leaders in the work and leaders in organizations, we're responsible for moving the emphasis and that responsibility off of the peers and onto the rest of the team. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That made great sense. Yes, it absolutely did. And I think it dovetails well with Bertrand's comments. And I think it's going to dovetail well with this one. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to have only one youth peer on the staff, and your thoughts about that, folks?
Yes, definitely. So I got here, and we were a small staff of about 10 people when I first started, and it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was lonely. It was a very unique experience because it's like, okay, I know they're looking at me like, how do we deal with this kid? Because I was coming from high school, coming straight here, and it was mostly finding something to do with my time that was beneficial for the organization. But it's not lonely when you start working with different people and started learning different people's walks of life and how they came to recovery. So that was always interesting for me. And today, we moved up to about 35 staff, and we got 3 young people here, so I'm not alone. So I'm able to, teach them some of the things that I first learned when I got here, and it's very interesting because Neil may come out like, okay, are y'all working? And it's like, yeah, we're working. We're getting this done. And sometimes it looks like we're not focused, but that's what's making our world go around right there. So it's not lonely. I love learning from different people about their recovery experience and how they got to the place that they were. It was very interesting to see that I had relatable experiences with everybody from different walks of life. We have people that were correction officers. We have people that were, who were wardens of correctional facilities, and deputy directors of juvenile justice, and a Roman priest. And I was, how much relatability do I have with him? But when I actually sat down and worked with him, it was like we grew up the same, and hearing that some people started, using drugs and alcohol around the same age that I was. I was 9 years old when I started. And to hear that I wasn't alone in that was very, very interesting.
And Bertrand, I think you're also, you're talking about a skill that I think a lot of young people have, this ability to sort of bridge our experience with others and having sort of an openness, if we're given that opportunity to be accepted at the table, right? So if others will let us sort of own our role at the table, we can start making those connections with all those people that we wouldn't necessarily feel connected to. Yeah.
And having that voice, when we having a all hands on deck meeting, having that voice and my voice mattering to all these people who've been in the field for 20, 30 years. My voice actually mattered. So that was awesome.
So I could pick up a little bit on that and maybe answer Lindsay's question as well about advice for retaining peer support staff. I think Bertrand's sharing a really great example of if youth peers feel fully accepted on the team, then you don't feel alone, even if you're the only peer. We find a lot of young people actually reaching out to us at Youth Move asking how to not feel so alone in their role. And there's some really great work. I live in a rural part of America, right, where oftentimes a lot of people are the only people in their role, whether they're peers or not. And we've seen some really great, regional meetings, the idea that peers from multiple agencies coming together for their professional development quarterly, having at least monthly sort of phone calls or webinars, if not in-person meetings. So you get that sort of co-reflection with peers from other agencies. Sometimes that's a state investment to make that happen. Sometimes that's a very grassroots. We make it happen for ourselves. And I think there's a really great argument to be made for peers who are able to provide their service from peer-run organizations where they have sort of a home base where lived experience really drives the work of the organization and not only be hired at the sort of clinical agency level. So you can think about those as you're designing what youth peer support looks like in your community and how you're financing it. In terms of retaining peer support staff, let's be realistic about millennials in the workplace, right? I have a young team. I have a different expectation about what long-term employment looks like for them because we all sort of want to move around a lot. But with that said, you know, wellness, self-care, supportive coaching relationships have to be an ingredient in our organizational culture. We have to let young adults know that there are growth opportunities in their role and give them a very clear pathway. This is how you learn more. This is how you gain more responsibilities. This is the path to follow. We need to be clearer about that. And then we need to be really, really candid with ourselves about how we build an environment like an HR environment that lets us really learn from young adults who are choosing to leave the workforce, right? This is more than a required exit interview that takes 30 minutes on the last day, right? What does success really look like? When were you supported? And what's making you choose to take a different path right now? And how do we use that in our improvement processes to get better at offering that supportive environment?
That is so awesome, Johanna, and I'm glad that you mentioned that because, you know, for a long time, I actually was promoted this year from the youth advocate to peer recovery warm line coach, and you know, knowing that I could grow and knowing that I can grow within an organization was very helpful for me, and you know, knowing that my organization was supportive of my growth, even if it was branching out to another organization. They were supportive for me in that moment. So that's awesome.
That's fantastic, guys. So folks, I'm going to, it's 5 minutes to the top of the hour. I want to turn this over to Johanna again and have her talk briefly about the resources that are available. And then she's going to kick that back to me, and we're going to close everybody out and get everybody on their way on this fine Thursday. Johanna?
All right. So there's a bunch of resources in your handouts pod that we thought might be helpful if you're offering youth peer support, and the hyperlinks to find those are also in the slide deck, so a couple ways to access the resources. Many of these are about the things we've talked about in terms of how do we finance, how do we define, what does peer engagement look like in sort of particular teaming environments, and a little bit about what does the research tell us about youth peer support and why it's unique. I draw special attention to those of you that are trying to build buy-in in your community and to explain to others what youth peer support is and why it's a needed addition to your sort of comprehensive array of services. There are a couple of really quick under 3-minute videos that describe what youth peer support is and then what does supervision and support look like for young people. And there are some tools that we hope are useful for you and your community as you're building buy-in. And as Stephen mentioned in the beginning, additional resources or questions can totally be submitted in all of the Brass Tacks TA request options. And for those of you that are looking for a definition, sort of direction for youth peer support, we've found a lot of communities are benefiting from the joint bulletin that CMS and SAMHSA put out, both defining and then creating the opportunity for parent and youth peer support to be offered and financed through Medicaid. And so that joint bulletin is on here as well.
Wow, you guys.
Yeah, that's what I got, Stephen. So back to you.
Johanna, that was fabulous. Bertrand, you guys are just straight up rock stars. I thank you both for the time today. You know, I know there was a lot of preparation, and we spent a lot of time, you know, together. You guys are just incredibly impressive, and I'm honored to be able to work with both of you, and so thank you. Folks, we're just really glad that so many of you could come and participate today, and you know, it was a big, lively group. Thank you for that. If you haven't already, be sure to grab the resources that are now in the download pod, and you just heard Johanna go over those. You know, please make use of them.